Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Last month I got a little spicy on here responding to a comment from someone who said that they just wanted to use piercing as a way to get their foot in the door as a tattoo artist and didn't care about piercing. They just wanted to tattoo. And I had a lot of feelings about that statement, as one might imagine. But after making that video, I did receive a lot of messages and a lot of comments from folks who were like, well, what if I want to learn how to do both? Like, how would you suggest to go about that? What would you suggest that I do? So let's get into it a little bit, wanting to both tattoo and pierce, and why I, as a professional piercer, think that that's a pretty bad idea. So these days, a lot of people associate tattoos and piercings really hand in hand, and historically, that has really not been the case, and that's a deep dive for another video. That's a history video that I think I'd really like to make. But it's very much not the case for a variety of reasons, and one of the foremost among them is how unbelievably different the skill sets between tattooing and body piercing are. And to someone who's just maybe interested in getting into the industry, who's so used to associating tattooing and piercing as this solo entity that exists within the same studio that's so related to each other, I can see why folks would assume that they're super similar. And they do have some similarities, but their differences are far more glaring. Tattooing as a skill set is going to involve a lot more of an artistic foundation. Composition, color theory, lighting, proportion, backgrounds, perspective. It's a full art education alongside bloodborne pathogens, cross-contamination, sterilization and reprocessing, and just general biological health and safety when it comes to doing what we do and working with blood and biological materials. And that portion of it is where there's some overlap, because there's obviously still the same working with blood and biological materials, cross-contamination, bloodborne pathogens, safety and sterility when it comes to piercing as there is when it comes to tattooing. But that's kind of where the similarities stop. And the similarities that do exist within that health and safety perspective are honestly vastly different, especially in the last 10 years with the rise of disposable tubes, pre-sterilized disposable needles, and tattooing as an industry quickly moving away from the need to process and sterilize tools and equipment in-house. These days, most tattoo artists are using disposable supplies that are used once and disposed of. There's no reprocessing. They don't need to sterilize anything in studio. I know tattoo artists who work in studios who don't own autoclaves and still work completely safe, completely clean, and completely sterile. That is not the experience for body piercing, where even if we work disposable, we still need sterilization equipment to sterilize our jewelry and our tools and our supplies prior to piercing. We are puncturing the skin on much deeper levels. We have to have a much larger understanding of anatomy. Tattoo artists need to understand skin and skin in different placements on the body and how that's going to react to being tattoos. But as piercers, we need to understand ear cartilage, the internal structure of nipples, what happens to a navel when the umbilical cord is cut to create that scar tissue. We need to understand very in-depth the full anatomy of the endocrine system and the genitals, how they function, how they work, oral and facial anatomy, understand people's teeth and bite line and jaw structure. There is so much more in those areas that is very applicable to piercing. We need to understand about the metals and the materials we're working with, types of tools we're using, the jewelry we're using. They're honestly incredibly different skill sets when you really begin to break it down. And not only are they different skill sets, but they both take a really long time and a high level of repetition to really improve and become truly good, truly masterful at. There is this monumental initial time sink whenever you're learning how to do anything, but especially things like piercings and tattooing, where for your first 2 to 3 years, you are just learning so much, you are consuming so much information, so much media, so much foundation. You're building the structure that the rest of your career will sit on. And you really do need to be using all of your time very wisely during this time period that you're learning. For tattoo artists, they are learning all about these artistic fundamentals, color theory, light theory. They're learning how to pull clean lines. They are practicing a bunch in the studio and then going home and drawing and tracing and practicing hundreds of roses and skulls. They're studying hands and feet. They're looking at proportion studies and lighting studies. They're reading about these concepts of artwork, on top of learning about the sterilization and sanitation protocols that are important for the way they work. Piercers, on the other hand, we are absorbing so much information about anatomy, jewelry materials, and sterilization. We are working constantly in the studio learning how to size different pieces of jewelry, how to work with different pieces of jewelry, what companies they come from, how we need to set things up and break things down, all of that safety and cross-contamination. And then we're going home and we're reading more from jewelry companies and manufacturers. We're reading forums and learning about troubleshooting. We're learning about anatomy. We're watching videos and reading books and doing these prompts, and trying to do both of those things at once usually means that one will get sacrificed for the other, or you'll progress much more slowly at both than you would if you could focus all of your time, energy, and effort onto just one. Because every hour that you spend practicing pulling clean lines and reading over color theory is an hour that you are not spending familiarizing yourself with jewelry companies and learning about the cartilage structures of the inner ear. And so you kind of end up in this situation where you have to sacrifice a certain level of foundational learning for one over the other, and it's very, very hard to balance doing both. And a lot of that comes from the fact that both of these are skills that grow through repetition. So the more you tattoo, the more you practice pulling lines, the more you sit down with a pen and draw, the better and more confident your hands are going to get. And likewise with piercing, the more you sit down and thread and unthread jewelry, bend and unbend threadless pins, practice putting jewelry in on leather boards or on clients and friends who let you practice, the more you're going to learn, the more confident your hands are going to get. But they're totally different skill sets, and they're both built on the foundation of repetition. So when you're trying to learn both at once, you're faced with this dilemma of, do I prioritize working my hands towards pulling clean lines, or do I prioritize my hands working towards opening 8-gauge captives? And you have to focus your energy, your effort on one place or the other, and whatever you chose not to focus on kind of falls to the wayside, doesn't get as much attention, get as much practice, doesn't get as much repetition. And so much of this is learned purely through doing it time and time and time again. So every time you're sitting there practicing line work and reading about color theory, you could be practicing your captive bead rings. You could be practicing seam rings. And you can't get back the time benefit of doing that repetition. You just have to do it. So dividing your time between both becomes really difficult. And it's not just dividing your time when you're learning at home or practicing in quiet hours of the studio. It's also dividing your time when you're actually at work. Tattoo artists and piercers work on very different schedules and setups throughout the day. Most piercers do anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes is the length of time that it takes them to work with a single client. We are seeing 30, 40, sometimes 50, 60 people in a day doing all of these services, working on things. When you're a piercing apprentice, you are expected to be in the room with your mentor for all of that, watching all of these different interactions come in, seeing all of these different piercings get done, learning about the client interactions, the process of doing these things. Tattoo artists, they're likely to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 hours with one client on one piece. And as an apprentice, it's really important to sit there and watch that entire piece come to fruition. See how the artist puts down their lines. Look at how they work across the stencil over time to keep their stencil intact. Look at the ways they layer their shading and their color. What comes first? What comes second? What comes third? How do they work with the skin as it becomes more agitated over the course of a long tattoo? How do they work across the body and keep their client comfortable and able to sit for everything? It's very important that you're there observing the entire tattoo and seeing that process from start to finish and learning how to do all of these things. If you decide that you want to try and learn both, you get put in this impossible situation where your tattoo mentor has this very important tattoo for you to sit on that's going to take 5 hours, and it's really important for you to get to see that whole process. But in that 5 hours, your piercing mentor is going to do 13 piercings that would be really, really important for you to see. You might be able to get hands-on and get some experience marking or help with some jewelry changes. So you either have to pick one and sacrifice working on and learning the other, or try and hop back and forth and hope that you didn't miss the cool surface piercing you wanted to see, and then you didn't miss how the artist was applying white in a certain section because you were watching a piercing. And again, your time gets very divided. You are not giving 100% of your attention to either one. It's not getting 100% of your effort, and it can be very hard as an apprentice when you're looking to get new clients to time your days. You've got some people who want to come for you and get tattoos, and those are going to each take 2 to 3 hours. But you've got people who want to come to you and get piercings. Those are only going to take 15 to 30 minutes. Do you leave your tattoo client sitting there and go and do the piercing real quick to learn? Are you still thinking about that tattoo in the back of your mind while you're going there to do the piercing? Or are you hard resetting and focusing on the piercing, but then you're forgetting about your tattoo client who's sitting there getting sore, getting swollen, the skin's being affected by you being away for the length of time it takes you to do the piercing? So the logistics of trying to learn both at once are very, very difficult, and almost every single time I see someone do this, I watch one or the other get overlooked or put to the side, and I watch the clients for one or the other not really get the experience that they deserve and that they should. A dedicated, focused experience where someone is 100% invested in the work they're doing for them. Certainly not on the same level as when you see someone who is just a tattoo apprentice and just a tattoo artist, or just a piercing apprentice and just a body piercer. And so what I see happen when people try and get into doing both is, in the best case scenario, I see someone who ends up just average at both, who really could have been an amazing piercer or an amazing tattoo artist, but because they had to divide their time, their labor, their energy, neither one got 100%, they've ended up just kind of average at both of them. And even that's pretty uncommon. What I see the most is someone who ends up average at one and bad at the other. And I see it usually folks focus more on tattoos. There's a little bit more weight and pressure on tattoos. It's viewed as this like permanent thing on your body. And given some of the history between tattooing and piercing, a lot of tattoo artists view it as just a body piercing. So I see these young tattoo artist piercers and these apprentices who are doing pretty decent tattoo work, and then I look at their piercing work, I see low quality jewelry, I see bad angles, I see improper placement, I just see a neglectful experience where it's very obvious that they are really investing their time in tattooing and tattooing well, and they're not giving piercing the same attention, the same time, and the same effort. And ultimately, who gets hurt in these situations is the client. Because yes, if you do this for long enough, you'll get enough repetition in, you'll become average, if not even good, eventually at both. But in the meantime, when you're focusing on piercing or focusing on tattooing, when you're distracted by one over the other, it's your clients who are paying the price. It's your clients who are coming in and getting not the best tattoo or not the best piercing because you're not 100% focused on that, because you're having to divide and split up your efforts. And it's the clients who deserve to get the best when they're coming in and getting this work done. It's the clients who's trusting you with their bodies and putting their bodies on the line, and they should be treated with the utmost respect, dedication, and focus. Your tattoo clients don't deserve you getting up in the middle of a tattoo to go do a piercing really quick. And your piercing clients don't deserve you to still be thinking about the tattoo you're working on in the back of your head instead of focusing on the piercing that you're supposed to be doing for them. They deserve you having really focused on getting a full foundational education for the service that it is that you're offering. Instead of trying to bounce back and forth between the two and letting important foundational education slip through the cracks because you didn't have the time, you had to work on your line work. You had to practice your captives. You didn't get a chance to focus on learning that thing. If your heart is really and truly set on trying to do both, I would choose one, focus on that and master that first. Spend 5 or 7 years just tattooing or just piercing. And then if at that point you want to try and add the other in, when you already have a really stable foundation for the first one, when you already have a really strong skill set, when you're not trying to run around and balance learning how to do these two very different things at once, get that first full foundation and then add in learning the other one. And I have some friends who have done this, who have started out as piercers or tattoo artists and then made the pivot to do the other thing. And in speaking with them, they've all talked about how unbelievably difficult and different it was to learn this new skill set, how bad at it they felt for the first many months after being so good at the skill set they learned first. And of course, how much they cannot imagine trying to learn both of these things at once and learn them well and give them full energy and effort. And a lot of them express that they have to completely put aside the thing that they learned to do first. One of my friends only pierces for 4 hours a week on a half shift because all of the rest of her time is dedicated to focusing on tattooing. And she's even mentioned because she's focusing on that, she feels like her piercing skills are slipping. Had to remove a lot of advanced services off of the services she offers because she just doesn't feel as on top of her game to be doing things like surface work and industrials. She's only offering very simple piercings because learning to tattoo is taking so much of her focus. And it deserves so much of her focus. It deserves 100% of her energy and effort, and so do her tattoo clients. If you've thought about doing both or you're interested in doing both, I hope this video gave you a little bit of insight into the complexities and the differences in both of these art forms and why it is so much better and so much safer to focus on just one and build a very strong foundation before moving on to learning the other. In an ideal world, I think we should really just specialize and focus on one. I've been a full-time piercer for 12 years and I still spend so much of my free time improving my piercing skills, reading and researching things relevant to piercing, and growing as a piercer. I, at 12 years in, could not even imagine trying to maintain the skill level I'm at as a piercer while trying to learn tattooing. I've wanted to learn like sewing as a hobby for the last 5 years and haven't even made any real progress because I'm still learning so much about piercing, growing so much as a piercer, and that's still my main passion. So if at all possible, I encourage you to specialize. I encourage you to focus on one thing and really give it 100% of your energy and effort. You deserve that, your career deserves that, and your clients deserve that. Thanks so much for hanging out and chatting again with me. I can't wait to hear what y'all think of this video and all of the comments and all of the viewpoints. And I'm sure we'll sit down and chat again soon. Bye.